And we are live. Welcome to the show, everyone. It is Tuesday night with the Maximo Show here at VOD Pod Media. I'm your host, as always, Maximo, taking over your Tuesday with this squeaky clean live stream by the homie Gylan Jackson. You know it's popping out here because we've got the man, the original. I mean, it's really need no introduction, but Mr. Jesse Borrego is in the house today. One of the OGs, one of the VLs, can we say? He's just got a whole filmography and a whole resume and list of credentials that we could go over, but we're not going to get into the whole thing. Just go ahead and Google Mr. Jesse Borrego if you don't know. But first, give us a like, give us a comment, give us a share, type in all of your questions. Let us know where you're chiming in from. When everybody found out that I was having Jesse on the show this week, people were excited. They wanted to know if they could come down to the studio. They wanted to know if they can send us food and drink and all of these things. And so you can only comment now. So give us a like, give us a comment, give us a share here at VOD Pod Media. You know we're doing it live here Tuesday night, as always. And we've got Mr. Jesse Borrego. Jesse, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good, Carnal Maximo. How you doing, brother?
Man, it's great to have you on. And we're going to get right into it, man, because you've had an illustrious career. It is not over yet, but recently, 30 years after the film Blood In, Blood Out, that has come up. Recently, it's been 30 years, right? It was 1992? 93. And
April 16th, 1993.
That's when it was released.
This was the opening date, yeah.
And so did you know when you got involved with this program, we're going to jump right in, and we're going to bounce around a little bit in your career.
Let's get it.
Did you know that film was going to be as big as it was in our culture? I got a guy who called me, said he watches that film every Sunday. He watches it every Sunday just because he loves the film, Did you know that the film was going to be that much of a cultural classic and just a mainstay in our community?
Yes. I believe that film was destined to win Academy Awards. Definitely would have been nominated for Best Screenplay, Jimmy Santiago Baca. Definitely Taylor Hackford as director. Gabriel Beristain, for director of photography. One of the actors would have gotten nominated, if not several of them. You're talking about Bruno Rubeo, production design, Maya Rubeo, costume design. There was so many different levels of cinematic love in that it was going to win awards. But I also think the authenticity and the truth and the passion of it was too much for the studios at that time, because that wasn't really what they were trying to do. They were trying to sell, tacos. And I think to them, the fact that it became something so illustrious, And I knew what I was going to do. Taylor approached me after the auditions for La Bamba, and he said, look, I've got this other film, and you need to be a part of it, and you need to help me cast the Vatos Locos. And I told him, I said, okay, Taylor, but if you're coming to me for the authenticity, then I'm going to tell you that Chicano culture is very important to me, and the representation of it is very important. So even though the story's a street story, I'm still going to be trying to find the places where we can uplift the cultura and the raza. And so I have to play the artist, first of all, because I know Chicano artists and I grew up with them. San Antonio is an art town, so I grew up with Mel Casas and the Consafos movement. And I saw Chicano artists labor in obscurity. They were my homies. They were the vatos that I learned from. When I was doing Chicano theater in the barrio, in the west side and the south side, those were the parties that we would go to, So the beginnings way before First Fridays and all that. So that was the cultura that I grew up in, and it was the same when I went to LA and I got introduced to the Asco scene and all the heavy East Los, art scene, which had had a modern art movement of itself. All of them were activist movimientos,
Yeah.
So as an actor, to represent that movimiento and the character of Crucito, I took it very seriously. So at that point I went, look, I can't really affect the rest of the film because, that's your onda, it's your movie, but I know that if you want me to really, help you with this, you gotta allow me to help you with this. And that was something that Carlos Aguilar said in his LA Times article, that really what Taylor did was he trusted the Chicano artists that he had around him. You know, Jimmy with the screenplay, those of us as actors, Alan Hernandez.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. But the artist who actually did the paintings for Crucito, he was a contemporary of Jesse Trevino's. He was right there in the mix with all of them, And so I think his talent was very necessary for the character of Crucito, again, on authenticity, a cultural authenticity that I think that's why it resonates 30 years later. And then we were able to transfer that into the Spanish translation, Sangre por Sangre.
Oh, wow.
And I like to tell people que yo doblé mi voz en español, It was something that I asked. After the film had been done, they told me, well, we're going to simultaneously release one in Mexico and Latin America, Sangre por Sangre. And I said, well, who's doubling the voice? And they said, well, we have these Mexican actors. And I said, well, I want to do Crucito's voice.
Yeah.
And they said, well, it's not necessary. You don't have to. And I said, no,
Yeah.
I want to. Primeramente, yo puedo actuar en español porque soy de familia mexicana, right? Mexicanos, americanos, they're all Tejanos from South Texas. And they were very bilingual, so we grew up very bilingual. So I said, so I can act in Spanish. I go, but second of all, the Chicano slang, the calor, wasn't really known at that time in Mexico. And so I said, the Mexican actors are not going to know the slang, and I know my performance, so I'm going to be able to loop it a lot faster. So ultimately, they saw the advantage to that. But it's one of the things I'm proud of, because now all of Latin America, even though Blood In, Blood Out was released as Bound by Honor, because the studios were trying to undercut it, and so therefore not get people to go out to the box office and see it in the theaters, it was released in Mexico as Sangre por Sangre, and they promoted it. So that film for 30 years has been, one of their films.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a Chicano film to them. It was, a Mexicano film to them. Gente from El Salvador would see it and say it was an Salvadorian story. So I think that every cultural group that got to see it kind of understood the universal narrative of it. And that's why I think it became so popular at that cult level, Realistically, the studio wound up inadvertently creating the perfect storm for it. It took 30 years, but I think ultimately it got to all the audiences it needed to. And now it's got a whole new generation.
Sure.
Because the raza, it's like their little treasure. They carry it around and then, hey, have you ever seen? And next thing you know, there's always one or two family members that haven't seen it yet. So
they're going to watch it.
It's movie night. It's movie night.
Movie night. That's so funny.
And it created, I think, a whole generation of movies of that decade. Gregory Nava was influenced by it, even though he saw El Norte, Mi Familia, and a lot of the films that he did after that. He had already seen there was a wave coming.
Yeah.
Allison Anders, the very next year, Mi Vida Loca turns 30 years. That was the direct feminist perspective of the urban street story in LA. So she just took it into another barrio that she was in Echo Park. She knew some of the women that were in the Echo Park clica, and she exemplified them and told the same story from the woman's perspective, created a whole nother genre. So you saw how that movement, all started happening at kind of the same time. So, and I think that since then there hasn't really been much.
No, there hasn't.
Other than the return to the old tired narco narrative, the inmigrante, pobre inmigrante, the pobrecitos de allá, And the Chicano, kind of experience and story and narrative has kind of gotten watered down. It's become comedic, right? Yeah. It's funny now. It's hilarious, And now the vato kind of mentality is, this kind of low class, uneducated perspective that's an urban perspective, right? And so we lost that kind of classic, direction that I was trying to take that narrative, So
well, you certainly brought it in the film. you talked about, you were like, hey, if you're going to give me this opportunity, I'm going to go deep in this. And you certainly did in that film, in that role. When did you say, okay, I'm going to be an actor? Right, growing up in San Antonio, did you always have that appreciation for the arts and the storytelling and the theater, the production? When did you say, okay, I'm going to do this acting thing?
Yeah, speaking of, talking about my father and his influence, Jesse Borrego Sr., or actually we found out he was Jesse Borrego Jr. because I'm the third, he grew up playing accordion. And he was a contemporary of Flaco Jimenez. He grew up with Mingo and all those guys. In the late 50s, early 60s, where they made their bones. He had his own conjunto through the 60s and 70s. And then his career kind of got derailed. And so in the late 70s, or rather in the 80s, when I got on the television show Fame.
Yeah, Fame.
I had seen Los Lobos. And so I kind of tried to revive his career with a group that I called Los Muertos here locally. With a local Tejano recording artist, Roger Velasquez. I went to high school with him. And so Roger at that time was jumping around with different Tejano bands. He was singing with the Latin Breed. He was doing all of this. So I got him to jump in with us, and we kind of did a kind of a rockabilly Chicano soul group that eventually wound up becoming something that we played with through the 90s, right? But the influence of my father, when we look back, especially recently, looking back at a lot of his recordings and a lot of the stuff we were able to do with our family band, Conjunto Borrego, in the last 20 years, thank God. But watching his performances, my brother looked over at me and he goes, he was the first actor, right? And I realized that that's where I got it from. That watching him, if you watch him sing songs, he's a performer.
Yeah.
You really feel everything that he's singing about. And so I realized that I grew up as a kid watching this man perform and tell stories. So by the time I was 5, 6 years old, and I was doing it in school, in kindergarten and in elementary school, me and my sister, she was the alpha performer. She was the one that got me into choir. She was the first dancer. She was the first performer. So I just followed in the family footsteps.
Yeah.
And before you knew it, I was doing it in my own way. So I think there was never really a conscious, this is what I want to do. I just looked around, and before you knew it, that's what I was good at.
So how old were you when you got landed the Fame gig?
Well, when I landed Fame, I went to Incarnate Word and studied theater there for 3 years. Then I went to California Institute of the Arts and studied acting there for a year, which was an intensive acting program. But while I was there, they had open auditions for the television show Fame. It had just passed its second year. Bill Blinn was getting ready to retire from the show, and I think him and Debbie Allen, they were looking for new talent. Well, they hit on this idea, this first American Idol type of audition, where they'd find new talent off the streets. So any performer could basically come in and audition. It was an open audition.
Yeah.
Right? So at that time, I was at Cal Arts, and everybody there thought they were hotshots because there was an acting program, there was a music school there, and there was a dancing school. So it was a Fame college.
Yeah.
And there were a few of us that were triple threats. So like I said, I grew up watching my dad perform, so I was a singer, naturally. Then I started acting in school because I was the class clown kid. So next thing you know, I was the performer kid with my sister. So I was singing, acting, and then my sister was a dancer. So guess what?
So you were that triple threat.
So I was a triple threat. Me and my sister were triple threats growing up. We used to dance. We used to disco dance because we came up in the late 70s, early 80s. We used to disco dance in the summers to raise money for our summer fun. And I was always getting in trouble because I was too young to get into the clubs where the contests were being held. So once they figured us out, they started calling me out and going, "He's not old enough." And they check my ID and kick us out.
Wow.
But hey, a couple of times I got it. But what that did is, and I try to explain this to young performers now, take every opportunity you can to do everything you can. Don't be afraid to try anything new when it comes to a performance skill. Get in front of the camera. Get in front of the mic. You know how it is.
Mm-hmm.
You feel it. What are you going to do? You got to go for it.
You got to
right?
go.
You got to go for it. And so I think that kind of spirit was what I had in me. I had no fear.
Yeah.
And so I was modeling for Joskies, and I was dancing for the dance contest, and I was acting, for the this and the that. And in college, I was the triple threat. I was the triple threat kid. But I also realized in college that my culture was not really represented.
At that time, no, yeah.
I wasn't there. There weren't any Latino playwrights. We weren't doing any bilingual plays. We weren't doing anything about Chicanos or Mexican Americans or even Hispanics.
Yeah.
So to me, I didn't really see myself represented. Don't get me wrong. I loved Ibsen and O'Neill and all the stuff that I was learning, Shakespeare, but I saw that there was something missing. And instead of seeing something missing, I said, this is where I can fill that.
Yeah.
So all of this to answer your question, that I was always aware of my culture as something that set me apart. And so I felt that I could really live that and breathe that as I moved into my career. So when I auditioned for Fame, when I walked into that audition, I was looking around going, how can I present myself as who I am? So the first thing I did was some sort of strategic, okay, I'm dancing with some of the best dancers in LA and New York. So I better not audition with these guys, right? Debbie Allen was like, if you want to dance, stay right here in this rehearsal hall. And if you want to sing, go with that other group. So I grew up singing my dad's music. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go with the singers. Yeah. Then I said, well, what do they want to hear? Well, everybody was doing Broadway shows and, pop songs. And I said, I'm going to sing a song that I heard my dad sing. And it was a bolero. It was a Carlos Gardel tango from Argentina that he had re-recorded as a bolero on accordion.
Wow.
It's a beautiful song. It's called Cuesta Abajo. Well, years of listening to my dad's music, I'd memorized it all. So I flipped around and I started singing for them, Si arrastré por este mundo la vergüenza de haber sido el dolor de ya no ser. Bajo el ala del sombrero, cuántas veces embosada, una lágrima asomada, ya no pude contener. Oh, by the way, I can sing in English too. Mm-hmm. Bam! And I threw down a little pop song. So they were like, who is this kid?
Yeah.
I
can see that.
Come back, come back, and here's the number.
Here's your callback.
So I was like, whoosh, made it through round one. So when I came back, then I was dancing for Debbie Allen, but I was dancing with a bunch of singers. So I was looking good.
You were good, yeah.
So it was a strategic move, but all I was really trying to do was show people I've got the goods.
Yeah, you had it.
I've got something a little different than what you got here. And luckily enough, I made it through, and I was able to get an acting gig, and I got an agent out of that, got a career out of that. But, and luckily enough, the character of Jesse Velasquez, everybody thought he was Puerto Rican because he was in New York, but it turned out that he was a dreamer. He was a Mexicano from Juarez. So the backstory turns out that Jesse Velasquez was from Juarez. His family was living in El Paso. They got caught by the migra, and he escaped and made his way up to the School of Performing Arts in New York.
Wow.
To try to become a star and bring his family back.
Wow.
It's a cool backstory.
Yeah.
I had to sing for my green card. That was so funny. Said, man, I wish it was that simple.
Oh, my God.
But it turns out that he was a dreamer. I mean, they didn't call him a dreamer
Not
back
at that
then,
time,
but
yeah.
when I think about it now, I was like, wow. He was not only a Mexican-American character, he was a Mexicano. So it was kind of cool to be able to, in other words, to represent who I really was. And utilize all of my cultural talent for the character itself. And I spent 3 years in that character. And between seasons, I'd come back to San Antonio. That's when I started the band with my father. Started trying to do more here in San Antonio. Started a little production company called Lupita Productions. And really tried to keep myself connected to the cultural inspiration of San Antonio.
Yeah.
Musically, performance-wise, and at that time then becoming involved in the television and film industry, then trying to get involved with the very latent film scene here. And that's when my brother, out of the Air Force, got into the RTF program at SAC. Then he went to Austin and studied film there. And then I brought him and all his graduate students from Austin in the early 90s who were all Chicanos from around Texas, El Paso, I mean, all different places, Austin. And I brought them all to San Antonio. We tried to our little film scene here. Robert Rodriguez had just done El Mariachi. So that's kind of really what I've been concentrating on in San Antonio in the last 20, 30 years, is keeping that I-10 connection, and seeing how much I can go back and forth. And just keep building on the legacy that I've created.
Yeah.
You know? And that's why I work a lot with Cine Festival. Now we're working with trying to build the film school at San Antonio College, which is an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution. So it's going to directly impact the next Jesse Borregos, you know. And if I can get them into the higher education setting, that's something I always suggest when they ask me as a young actor, how do I go, you know what, you can go and try it, that's not an issue, but if you can, I started spinning the script a couple of years ago. I started doing more signings due to Blood In, Blood Out and the popularity of it in some of my other films. So I started saying, well, how can I flip the script now that I have generations of fans with this film? And this was about 20-something years ago that I started realizing that I could do Comic-Cons.
Yeah, because those are all over, right?
Yeah, but again, that specific film, right? And I started taking Adan Hernandez, the artist, with me. And I said, look, let's promote your art. Okay,
Yeah,
the film's in obscurity, but let's promote your art. And that way we can promote the film, your work, and my participation in it. And we can have a little something going. And if you want, we can merchandise, T-shirts, the whole bit. He had gotten the rights back to all of the images from the movie. And so that was, I think, a nice little opportunity for us. Well, as we started to do it, I realized that there was generations within these familias. Hombre, tenían, all the chavalones had seen it, and you know, the viejitos had seen it.
Yeah.
It was like a family event to watch Blood In, Blood Out. Like you said, oh, we just saw it last night.
Yeah.
Or, we can't believe you're here. We're going to go watch it right now. That type of thing. And so I said to myself, okay, now that I'm working with some of these movements, right? The film movement, trying to get the chavalones into college, higher education. Our old high school, Harlandale High School, had a film school. But I thought to myself, okay, what happens when these kids graduate? They ain't got no money to go to even UT, some of them.
Yeah.
You know? Which is a very elitist program. So they don't have the feria or they don't have the chops, they ain't getting in. So they certainly can't go to NYU or UCLA off the bat. So I started trying to figure out, how can I, again, get them involved? So I started saying, Vatos Locos go to college to a certain generation. Yeah. And at first I would get that kind of reaction, like, what? So then I you know, there's always been this weird internet rumor that there was going to be a part 2. You've heard that, right? Yeah. They're doing part 2. And so I'm always getting asked about that. So I kind of turned into that and I said, yeah, you know, and in part 2, Crucito tries to get the young Vatos Locos to go to community college. They bought it, man. They'd look at me like, okay, that could work. Right? Trying to get them out of gang banging and into college. So at that point, it started kind of sinking in. And after a few seasons, I started actually getting kids that loved Blood In, Blood Out who were going to college. Not to say that got them into college, but it started to I started to realize that there was something changing in our culture, in our generations, and that I was on that tip. So I kept going with that and trying to utilize all of my legacy to connect these dots in these different parts of my world, the art world, the film world, my connection to the industry. In 2021, I was accepted as a voting member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. There's a big Latino movement, advocacy movement in Hollywood, headed by Edward James Olmos, Alma Martinez, a lot of heavy people that have been in the industry for over 30, 40 years, to get more voting members in the Academy. And so every year they throw hundreds of nominees, right? And again, if you're a nominee, then you got to have the resume.
Yeah.
So 2021, as part of their diversity initiative, Aperture 2021, I was accepted with a bunch of other.
Congratulations.
Yeah, but again, that milestone and that connection. So then how can I connect that dot to what I'm trying to do? So that's kind of the work that I do a lot. Even the acting work that I'm doing now, I'm doing a lot of work with young filmmakers.
Yeah.
There's a Cine Festival is coming up at the Guadalupe Theater. And I always try to, usually I'm the MC there. I try to bring in a film. My nonprofit, Cine Studio San Antonio, tries to sponsor screenings and connect the dots again with films that we think should be there. But I'm actually in a short that was at Cannes, and it's called Addicted to You, a young woman named Sonia Balcazar. Again, she's doing it on her own, and she decided not to wait for Hollywood.
Yeah.
And she wrote and produced her own film that she stars in that's about her life.
Wow.
And she reached out to me, and I loved the script. I loved the idea and what it dealt with. And women's empowerment, and I played her father in it, but it turned out to be beautiful film, well directed by these young Chicanos that are in Hollywood trying to make it, and trying to blaze their own path. So they had just done a film that won a bunch of awards called Slippin' into Darkness. But it's these groups out of LA, and again, these young, inspiring filmmakers. And so the fact that this little short that I did with them went to Cannes, is going to be at Cine Festival, again, that
you're bringing it back.
Yeah,
you always have done good at that. Now I've heard another one, and I work really quickly. And again, we're bouncing around. We're gonna we're gonna kind of cut it a little bit short tonight because we know we've got other affairs to get to, but. You know, we want to give a shout out to all of our friends at Delgado Law Firm. If you've been in a car or truck accident on these busy streets of San Antonio, I saw an accident on the way here, up 37 from the south side. If you've been in a car or truck accident, you need to contact Ofelia Delgado at Delgado Law Firm. She's going to be your person to go to, La Mera Mera. Give her a call. We're going to get her number in the comment section. And so make sure you give her a call if you know anybody that's been affected by that. We also want to give a shout out to all of our friends that are supporting VODpod, everybody that's watching, people with San Pluto Show, Carolina Teague, A League of Their Own, More Than Magic, Kirsten Thompson. We want to give a shout out to everybody that's been supporting, the work here, because the creation of content with the talent that we know is there is important. We've got to be the ones that tell our stories. We've got to be the ones that are putting the road to the rubber, right? Speaking of that, to kind of tie this back in, I had saw a short film at one of the festivals here a while ago, and I don't remember the title of the film, but apparently the film was brought to you to act in the film. And the film had the young mariachi, Sebastian, in it. Do you remember this film now? I think Sebastian, the little mariachi.
Birth of a Killer?
I think it is. And they asked you to be like the killer. Something along those lines, and you told him, "Look, I don't play those sorts of roles." Something along those lines. You told him, like, I don't portray our culture like that anymore. But I like the script, and I'll play his dad. Something along those lines. Can you give us that story?
The same thing happened in Colombiana. Colombiana with Zoe Saldaña.
Well, tell us about it.
They had me audition for The Heavy, right? And I said, well, I don't really play these heavies anymore. In the mid-'90s, after Blood In, Blood Out, after Mi Vida Loca and all the films that I had done with the early Chicano urban gang stories, my daughter had just turned 4 or 5 years old, and I remember thinking to myself, okay, someday she's going to ask me, Dad, what were you doing when I was, 5, 6 years old? And I said to myself, if I point to my work at that time and it's a bunch of
gang bangers,
drug dealers, then the proof's in the pudding. What I did was right there. I have younger fans from the Fame days. I have, I've done the good Chicano stories. I want to play some positive role models. So give me a Chicano who's a teacher. Give me an activist. Give me a lawyer. Give me even a cop on the right side of the law, right? Depending on the story. Well, at that time, that's not what was being written in Hollywood. We were on our way to the brownout that happened in '98. You remember the brownout when all of the major Latinos in Hollywood boycotted the Hollywood sweeps, right? At that time, the sweeps would happen in October, where all the new television shows were on. And there were no Latino characters at all in 1998 on series television. So we boycotted the sweeps. And imagine, so that was between 96, which is when I made this decision, to about, the mid 2000s, when we really didn't have any major positive Latino characters. So there was a time when I was not auditioning.
Yeah.
When anything that was presented to me, I didn't want to audition for. And so it kind of became my thing. I hate to say it because I probably gave up a lot of.
You probably did, yeah. Yeah. Opportunities.
But now when I look back and they talk about legacy and they talk about, what you've left behind as an artist, I'm proud of it. And
that says something.
Okay, yeah. And if, I think at this point as a cultural content creator, I feel good about that. And I feel that now when a lot of people say the exact same thing I was saying 25 years ago when they said I was crazy, it makes me feel proud, right? It makes me feel proud. And so now I don't mind I used to have a problem saying it to young actors because I didn't want them, necessarily to not work or to have to compromise that idea of themselves to work. Now I think that an actor can say, I want to be proud of what I'm doing, and it's okay. It's a sign of being a good actor, not necessarily a stupid or a dumb actor.
Yeah.
So, in Colombiana, it worked out for me because I knew that I was auditioning for the bad guy, but I knew that I wasn't heavy enough for the bad guy. So I played it differently, and I did the scene a different way. And I think that's why I wound up getting the part of the father. The same thing with Fear the Walking Dead. They kept wanting me to audition for these zombie world characters. And, they're either, horrible cabrones or they're victims, right? They get eaten by the zombie. There's no in between, dude.
Yeah.
And I said, I'll never play any of these characters. So I kept turning them down. Well, finally this character, Efrain, comes out. He's an ex-priest. He blesses the zombies. He saves Ruben Blades and brings water to the people. He's just real. Ruben he goes, man, that's the most compassionate character there's ever been in the zombie world. But it was something that I could play, something that I could do, and something I was proud of in a genre piece. And so, I got lucky. I've gotten lucky sticking to what I believe is something to be true. And now the things that I'm producing as a writer-director are the things that I want to say. And it makes me feel very confident about those characters and the stories. And like you said, what's to come? What's to come is going to be just as good as what I've done already.
Well, that speaks to your range, though, too. Because not everyone would have the skill and the abilities to do that, right? If someone's presented a role, you think, well, I might have to take this, or else I'm not going to get it.
Let me show you my range, and I try to explain it to people because at that time I was trying to show people my range. So I did Blood In, Blood Out, Mi Vida Loca, and I Like It Like That, back to back. So I did a Chicano artist, right? A Pinto. A poetic Pinto, and then I did a pre-op transgender character in the South Bronx, Puerto Rico.
Yeah, that's some range. That's some range, folks.
I was trying to show, but of course, all of those films were ahead of their time.
Yeah.
So none of them were feted, none of them were celebrated the way they should have in their time. So they all wound up coming out within that decade. So nobody got to really understand what I was trying to do. But that's okay, because in each of those worlds, I mean, this year at the New York Latino Film Festival, they're showing I Like It Like That and celebrating it.
Yeah.
You know, now they're saying, back in the day, that was the first time a woman of color directed and premiered a studio film, Darnell Martin. You know, same thing with Blood In, Blood Out. Now they're saying, oh my God, it was breaking boundaries at the time. Who was showing Chicano art in films?
Yeah, they weren't doing it then.
They weren't doing it then. So I think for me, having been part of those groundbreaking movements and films and narratives, it makes me feel good about the type of work that I'm doing now, which is trying to create that pathway in higher education in something that's very affordable, but yet a very robust cultural education right here in San Antonio for our chavalones, man, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that to me is more important than any film or character I've ever done.
Wow.
And then you know, when I'm able to look back, you know, I do a lot of work with the American Indians of Texas of the Spanish colonial missions. Well, AIT, I'm one of the longest serving board members now.
Okay.
So not only have I been on their board, but when you look at characters that I've portrayed, I've played Native Americans, I've played indigenous characters, and I had to prove them in order to play them. So when I did Tecumseh,
TNT, that was the big one,
At that time in the mid-90s, they were really the Native American groups were giving them a hard time.
About who was portraying them.
Who was portraying.
Correct.
And deservedly so.
Sure.
Right. Which was beautiful, because when they offered me the part, they'd had a guy online who never was able to prove his lineage. Well, when they come to me, next thing you know, they're like, you got to prove it up and down. And I said, wow, this is hilarious. For years, I've been too ethnic for the leads. Now I'm not ethnic enough. I'm like, this is hilarious. But luckily, my grandmother with affidavits was able to show that her great-grandmother was Apache from South Texas, was from a rancheria here. So that was our blood lineage through my mother. And then the Mexicano lineage of our Mexican-American heritage in South Texas and in Mexico, Monterrey. So, hello, we're Mexican-American, we're Chicanos.
Yeah, we got to remind our
That's
viewers
mestizos, man. Come
Absolutely.
on, we're already,
We got to remind a lot of our folks, you know, that Latinos, Mexican folks are native.
We're native,
Come
baby.
on now. Let's go. Let's get with it.
Come from Nuevo Mexico.
And we know, I think we know that.
Dude, hasta gente in Mexico identify with their indigenous. I was just in Michoacan with Elpidia Carrillo, and they're Purépecha. You know, so up in the hills of Michoacan, they're like, we're not Nahuatl, we're Purépecha. So they understand that their indigenous heritage is very important. And so I think for us here, working with the American Indians of Texas, who are the Coahuiltecos, the Tapilam family of the Coahuiltecos. But if you look at the mission roles, I mean, you see all those familias, Venados, the Comecrudos, the Apaches, the Comanches. So that just lets you know that our indigenous heritage in Texas is still right here. But as a performer, to be able to represent that in a character like Tecumseh, who was trying to unite, trying to get all the Miami and the Shawnee to recognize, hey, we're one. If we recognize we're one, they won't be able to expand anymore. But they're unified in their cultural whiteness. We're not. We're not unified in our cultural redness, in our cultural brownness. And that's what I try to explain people when they try to create that division. Oh, we're not this, or we're not, or you're not this, and you're not that. It's like, yeah, that's true. You can identify with whatever you identify with, but understand that the more we're unified in certain cultural aspects, the stronger we are, you know?
Sure.
And that means that, there has to be some sort of tolerance in that. And I think that's something that I've really tried to show with my cultural narrative, is that idea of tolerance. And again, if I can show you my cultural perspective, whether I'm doing Shakespeare or whether I'm doing Jimmy Baca, who's Chicano Shakespeare, or whether I'm doing, these young writers, that are producing little films around here, Once I get their words, I try to find the authenticity in that. That's their voice.
Yeah.
So even though it's my talent and my skill, I still want to let them know that their voice is important. And that's what we teach them over at SAC. That's what we teach them. That's what I teach them in these film and acting workshops that I teach here in San Antonio. Authenticity of self.
Sure.
Authenticity of cultural perspective. And that means that then your narrative is going to be authentic. Your story is going to be authentic. And that's the truth that we're looking for, right? It's not a I'm right truth and not a righteous truth. It's a universal perspective truth. And I think that's what we're missing in our American cinema. I hate to say it, but the death of cinema now has been the purchase of all these franchises. Comic book narratives. I'm sorry. We were never culturally represented in comic book narrative. So why they think that putting trillions of dollars into that narrative is going to represent us culturally, I don't know where they're getting that from, American history. When we look at the Western, dude, I try to teach the kids the perspective of the Western. I go, you realize that the Western style, the Western culture was a Hispanic one.
Yeah.
It wasn't Anglo-European.
Yeah, the cowboy stuff.
It was Spanish European. We brought the cattle industry over here. Then over 300 years, we created the cattle. We created the mestizaje that was the Southwest. We created the missions. We created all of the cattle drives and all of that. That's why the Southwest has all those names, So the indigenous and the Hispanic cultures of 300 years of colonization created that. They just came and took it over overnight and gave it a different name and then hung their hats on it and
made it their own, and they took it and ran with it.
The Maori Mavericks of the world created that mythology.
Yeah.
Well, that mythology, at the same time, right at the beginning of that mythology was when film was being created, photography. So what were the first narratives? Birth of a Nation, cowboy narratives, the taming of the Wild West. Well, what are we in that narrative culturally? We're the bad guys. We're the villains.
Yeah.
Why? The propaganda was trying to take over. Well, I realize now why the Western is the way it is. Because it's 100 years of that same narrative. It's difficult to break. So now you look at the stuff that, our man is producing with Yellowstone and all these, and it's that same perspective. If you look at the years that these tens of thousands of Westerns in the last 100 years have been, it's the same 75 years. You're telling me the Southwest only was around 75 years? No.
Yeah.
It was 300 to 500 years of Hispanic influence.
Oh, yeah.
French, Hispanic, and thousands of years of indigenous.
Absolutely. And that gets erased so easily.
Oh, erased in literally 50 years of a new technology of information. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I'm trying to wrap my kids' heads around. It's like, look, this is what I've learned in my 40 years of being in this industry, right? It's not our cultural industry, so don't get caught up in that. Get caught up in the skill set. Get caught up in learning the tools of how to tell stories in the digital age. Become the storytellers of the 21st century. And now skew it any way you want, man. I call myself a Chicano actor, but that's so specific for people, right? Unless they want to brand it. Then all of a sudden it's Chicano this and Chicano that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Chicano studies and then, bachelors in Chicano studies and all that. But the reality of it is it's really just the flavor of the month and how they want to use that, So really what I try to do now with my talent is feed the world, and how I feed the world. A lot of times it's as simple as this whole year it's been about going to events celebrating the 30th anniversary. So, a lot of it is glad handing. A lot of it is talking to people, celebrating with the fans, what they liked about it. And then I try to give them the tidbits that I think are important. Adan's art, Adan Hernandez, his skill, what he brought to the character of Crucito, how important those images are not only to the story, to my character, but to Chicano culture in general, how that moved the needle, Now we're talking, without that, the Cheech doesn't exist.
Correct.
Without that, the Jesse Trevino Conservancy that they're trying to create here in San Antonio to be a Mexican-American museum doesn't have legs, So we did it. We did that in American cinema, and I was proud of that. When Taylor first offered me the film, he said, look, I know you could pull off any of the characters, but, you be one of the vatos locos, so you can either be the artist or the cop, right? And I said, I got to be the artist, bro. That's one, the most complex character.
Dude, you brought
two, yeah, and so what I like to say is the reason I think people resonate to that, and I took it seriously at that time, is I knew that my performance as Crucito was going to be a gift to my people.
Wow.
And I said to myself, and I'm telling you, at that time I was playing all the major theaters in the United States. I was headlining, the Guthrie in Chicago, the Public in the New York Shakespeare Festival in New York, the Amundsen in L.A. So I was playing the big places. So I was at the top of my game. And I said to myself, this might be the only chance that I get to play an authentic Chicano character that's got 3 dimensions like this. So I better make them last, And so I really put all my heart and soul into it, which to me was kind of disheartening when I saw the back 8 months, which is when I saw that the studio had lost love for it, I started to notice that on our press junket. And I think having already been a student of the game and a student of the industry, having been a television star for 3 years, I knew for a major studio like MGM, I knew what the disconnect could be between the executive, the studio head, and the art and the artist itself. And their audience. It's a 3-way thing. And so I recognized that as a laborer, because I tell young actors and young filmmakers, you're a contract laborer. Don't get it twisted. This is not a filmmaking industry. This is a film selling industry. You're not on the selling side. You're on the making side. Yeah. So you're a contract laborer. Yeah. This is one of the few information literal medias where, as an artist, you give up the rights to your image, the rights to your writing. I mean, it's exploitative.
Yeah, you're a hired gun.
You're a hired gun, man. So, I mean, think about it. When you think about the $1 billion that Disney has made off of my face and my performance, I don't get to see any of that in the television and film contracts of residuals, That's just not the way that business works. So what I try to get our young filmmakers and our young actors to understand is, don't trip on that. You know what I mean? Learn the game. Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah.
And now be the player.
Yeah.
Right? So now the new angle for a lot of our filmmakers is like, don't just be a laborer. Be a creative thinker, be a content, be a producer as well. So that way, if you've got all the skills, then guess what? Now you've got the head skill as well. And that's really where you're gonna be able to come up on top. And that's what they're looking for now, right? If you look at all these influencers that are coming off of YouTube and TikTok, those are the new stars. But if you look at them, they do all their own stuff.
Yeah.
They shoot their own stuff. They edit their own stuff. Yeah. They're little wunderkinds.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm like, yeah, if that's the new way to go, and all these kids already know how to use these devices, then all I got to do is teach them to be culturally authentic and culturally proud.
Yeah.
Then they're going to tell that next Blood In, Blood Out.
Yeah.
They're going to figure out. Yeah, they're going to figure out the next Mi Vida Loca. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I would love to be a studio head that has this type of talent, that thinks like that, Then the mission of my studio can be, hey, we're not here to make a buck.
Yeah.
We're
because
here to share. And now it's more of a, when I worked in Mexico, so I did a couple of films in Mexico. Colombiana was one of them, but the other one was Bienvenidos, Welcome. And I'm very proud. I worked with a director named Gabriel Retes, independent film group called Rio Mixcoac out there. And they were, they were independent filmmakers. And he got to see Blood In, Blood Out because his daughter at the time was married to our director of photography. And he said, and he had just made a film, El Bulto, which had done really well. And so I saw it and I said, man, I love your filmmaking. And he goes, yeah, but, I don't understand you Chicanos, it seems like you got a chip on your shoulder.
Wow.
And I said, well, realistically, we've got more in common
Yeah.
with you Mexican filmmakers than we do with American filmmakers because we're marginalized. And he goes, really? He goes, but you would never come work with the independent Mexican film scene. And I said, seguro que sí. Next thing you know, he calls me, and there we are, me and my brother. We went out for about a month, and we shot this great film, and I played all these. I played a Chicano painter. I played a Chicano painter, and it was great. But it was great because I got to see exactly the way they do, and it's just like the Chicanos do it.
Sure.
A riatazos, a puñalazos, a empujones, any way we can, man, what they call rascuache, right?
Sure.
So, hey, man, any way you get it done. And that film won 5 Arieles.
Wow.
Yeah, so when I think about my ability to be able to transfer my skill set to any creative group, and that's why the Mexicanos love me, because I've thrown down with them. I've been in the trenches with them. When I went to Cine Sin Cines, Cine Festival in Michoacán that Elpidia's throwing, she goes, for the last 7 years, she's been going up into the hills of Michoacán, dude, to these indigenous villages that don't even have theaters. And we do a blow up, we show films, we do film workshops, but it's for them, you know? And when you see these kids that don't have any internet and they don't have any video games, they're so present. And if we could just teach them to tell, and they're making little short films. We have them now creating their own stories, writing their own scripts, shooting their own little videos.
Yeah.
Now you're teaching them this skill, demystifying all of this stuff, and at the same time you're empowering them to be culturally authentic.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the future of what I want to say I influenced this art form in, right? And now the fact that they love Sangre por Sangre, and that they're, we were walking up there in a place called Las Zarzamoras, up there in the hills of Michoacán, and I'm walking along and I hear somebody go, Crucito.
Yeah, I believe that.
And I turned around, dude, a campesino, a young campesino up there, and he goes, tú eres el actor, ¿verdad?
He recognized you.
But in vez de decir, hey, how you doing? I can't believe they recognize me. I said, ponle pa abajo. He came down with all his familia, took pictures, ahí celebramos, hey, pues aquí estamos para ustedes y esto y que el otro. And again, his eyes were like, I can't believe, no puedo creer que estás aquí con nosotros. And I told him the same thing. No puedo creer que ustedes conocen a Sangre por Sangre.
Yeah.
Después de 30 años. And so there was a mutual connection culturally, even though we were miles apart.
Yeah.
We were decades apart.
Yeah.
Because this young man was not alive in 1993. If he was, he had just been born.
Yeah.
Because he was about 30-something years old. So to me, I just saw this universal connection that validated my entire existence. Yeah. At the same time, I knew that I could say, by the way, quiero que escuches la música de mi papá. And if I played him a ranchera or if I played him a bolero de mi papá, he was going to vibe it, he was going to accept it, he was going to enjoy it. And so there was this instant cultural connection that's, again, thousands of miles apart, apparently cultures apart, and yet through the beauty of our cultura, the beauty of, say, a film like Sangre por Sangre, because that's what they know it as over there, and the ability of an artist to be able to connect himself to those worlds. You saw this beautiful connection, and when you saw the face of his wife, who was like, how do you know Crucito? How do you know you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And his daughters are looking at them like, why are my parents so excited? And knowing that someday they're going to show them the film.
Yeah.
Someday they're going to show my other work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a continuation of that love of cultura, that love of who they are. And maybe someday in their struggle, because, a lot of those indigenous communities in Mexico are under siege, by the forces, the economic forces that are illegal and legal. And that's in our world too, right?
Yeah.
So as brown people, we recognize that on the one hand, we're celebrated when they want to sell the culture, right? When they want to sell to us, but in the next legislation, they're outlawing Chicano studies in certain states.
Sure.
They're attacking CRT. They're attacking any type of don't say Chicano, don't call it this, don't call it that.
Even the term woke, they don't like.
They don't like woke, man. They don't like that. So there are these constant paradoxical movements because on the one hand, like I said, we're the biggest demographic right now in the Americas, all the way. And that's money, dollars and cents to them. It's also human labor, right? Human capital. But at the same time, they don't want to make sure that you understand that you're a human being.
Oh my gosh.
And that your power is in your su voto es su voz.
That's right, man. So much. You are an interesting cat, man. You're
No,
probably one of
bro.
the most interesting
We're just
cats.
spitting, man. We just playing.
And
We
that's
just
the thing,
playing,
man.
bro.
You've got that depth.
That they don't want to talk about, and we probably would have been screwed again because every time there's an emerging technology, we're always behind the ball. So when cable happened, for 5 or 6 years, we were left behind. By the time we got to that in 2007, DVD had already happened.
Yeah.
And so we put DVD on the table, but they were already worried about new media. So all of that got left behind. And so we've always been behind the ball. This is the first time that these two unions are in solidarity. Our contracts are up at the same time. So we're actually voting right now as to whether to authorize a strike. And I think the fact that the writers are already on strike, we're going to vote yes. And that means then that we have a good chance to hopefully negotiate a better deal for us in terms of residuals on all this streaming stuff. Because the cat was let out of the bag during the pandemic, you know, but the reality of it is that according to the old formula and according to what we negotiated in 2007, which was the new media contract, we don't get much. You know what I mean? We get the residuals, is what's left after the sharks feed and take a poop. You know, that's what a residual is. So to me, yay. You know, I'm glad the writers are doing it. I'm always in solidarity when one of our, you know, sister unions, brother unions goes to bat. We're always in solidarity with them. It's not always true on the other side, because usually when we are about to strike, the other unions are comfortable and they don't want to rock the boat. So, and I've experienced this where we were the bad guys and all we did was talk about it. And we worked for about 3 years without a contract because we didn't have the guts to strike. We couldn't vote for it. But all the other unions were looking at us like, you better sign. Come on, you don't want us to work. It's your fault. So it was kind of crazy. But we're always in solidarity. So we're in solidarity with the writers, and I believe that this is a good time. June 7th, we'll see, man.
All right.
You know, hopefully then, and what I think is going to happen is because the writers went on strike, I mean, I told my daughter, who's in the costumers union now, you know, I said, look, the reality of it is by the time they go on strike, they've already been deadlocked for months. So something happened where they wouldn't budge. So now it's all coming out and the writers are going on strike, but these are issues that they're not going to budge on. So yes, we're going to be on strike for a few months. I think the fact that the actors negotiation is up in June 7th is a good thing, because it's going to force the studios to come to the table and bargain sooner, because there's going to be 2 unions that are against them. So I think that this is going to be good. That means that it won't be a prolonged strike. Now, if they decide they're going to take us both on, then we were on strike anyway, so it's not really going to be any skin off the actor's nose. You see what I mean? So it's kind of a win-win. So it's the first time that it's ever happened that I think these 2 unions are their contracts are up at the same time. So, I mean, I can't remember it ever happening like this, timing-wise. So,
well, let's see. Power to the people, man.
Power
Let's
to
get
the people, man.
Let's get it going.
Solidarity, baby.
Last one, quickly. What are your thoughts on Victor Wembanyama, the Spurs' potential #1 pick? Is he going to take the Spurs, San Antonio, back to the promised land?
Woo! I think so, man. I think you know, those of us that were Spur fans all through during these last lean seasons deserve this.
Yeah, he's a talented guy.
Yeah. You know, well, it's good. I mean, it's great that #1, the French connection.
There you go.
He already knows this town treats, you know, our French players great, our international players great, but that means he also comes with the pedigree of the training. So, you know, he's not going to go through that try to get ready. I think he's going to come in ready to ball. And I think that if they keep a lot of the pieces that we have around us already, because, you know, I watched these last few seasons since the pandemic. Well, since we lost LaMarcus and we lost everybody.
Yeah.
So I thought that the pieces we kept were all good all-around players, that we were just missing that elite player that shows up in the fourth quarter. So really, all he has to do is be that fourth quarter guy.
Yeah.
The rest of the team is pretty good. I don't see us losing too many more pieces because they've been training these guys, and they're all multifaceted. They're all good
athletes,
defenders,
good young guns.
all good athletes, all good young guns. Yeah, they're all scorers. They were all averaging in the high teens or low 20s, dude. You know what I'm saying? They just didn't have that elite player in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
So
put up some fight.
They put up great fights. I mean, you saw a lot of those
Yeah.
games. They would take it down in the third quarter, and then we always knew they would run out of gas, right? But I said, man, we're playing these elite teams. I went to the game that the Lakers beat us, and we were there. You know, they had to keep LeBron and AD in all the way to the end of the game just to get that 20-point win. You know, same thing with Golden State. So to me, I just sat there and went, wow, we get one, maybe two elite players. we could be competitive.
Yeah.
We could be competitive. Now, I think it's all going to depend. I hope we don't lose Pop. You know, the reality of it is he could be,
Yeah,
you know,
he's getting ready at some point.
Yeah, you know, and it's on him. You know, I think he could go another 3 years if he wanted to.
Yeah.
But I also know that he's that guy that could say, cool, I'm outie. I got my thing happening, you know, got my Southtown thing. I'm ready to go.
Sure.
I hope not, because now with this player, come on, Pop, stick around a couple of years, man.
Yeah,
You know,
coach him
try to-
up.
Coach him up, dude. Coach him up. So I think that may be a stutter. If Pop leaves, then I think we'll be back to what Boston's going through right now, where you got a bunch of elite players, but you don't have a strong leader. You know, so I'm hoping it's the perfect storm. But, man, I was happy. I sat there and I said, no, there's no way. Then when we saw Houston get fourth, we went, no way.
It was big news.
It was beautiful. But, you know, I was there during the Robinson and I was there during the Duncan. And you know, me and my brother have been fans since the ABA days, since the ABA when we had the multicolored ball, remember? And the doctor was flying around. So you know, we've been there since the beginning. So we've seen the ups and the downs. And if you're a true fan, then you're there during the lean years.
Yeah.
You're there during the. You know, I had a lot of people. I got to go to a lot of games these last few seasons because a lot of people were
Didn't want to go.
And I'm like,
didn't want to go.
Give me those tickets, man. You know, I love to see these young bucks. And dude, if you saw how Pop was coaching,
He was still coaching
these
them.
last two seasons.
Yeah.
Oh my
He didn't
God,
give
it was
up.
beautiful.
Yeah, he didn't give up on him. He kept coaching.
Beautiful, and that's why I would love to go to the games, because I'd sit there and I'd watch Pop, and I'd watch him coaching these guys, and I'd see him fighting with those refs, and I was like, wow, that's a real coach. When you know you have a losing team, but you're coaching the best guys that you have, that you've been training, and I was like, wow, man, I will always be in awe of that man. So I'm hoping that while he's still here, and now that we've got, you know, my man, that all the other, and I think you're going to see some of these young cats start to, I think you're going to see some of them just flower.
Yeah.
Under this.
Yeah,
this new system.
we're in for a good treat with this young guy, and we hope he brings it
Absolutely.
back, brings the city back to the championship days.
I got to throw a quick shout out to this special leaf, original olive leaf iced tea. This pomegranate blueberry is killing.
That's right. I had one as well. So thank you so much for blessing us with your drinks. And that's our show tonight, folks. We hope you enjoyed it. Give us a like, give us a comment, give us a share. We've got to thank Jesse, man, just again, so much for your grace, your humility, coming through and dropping all this knowledge. And we can't wait to have you back here. You're always welcome at the table. Anytime we can connect with you is a true pleasure and honor. Thank you so much for watching tonight, folks. Big shout out to Gylan Jackson. Take it home, sir. We'll see you next week, folks. Much love.
Woo!
Ow!
Vatos locos forever.